Welcome to Jackson Lewis's podcast, We Get Work. Focused solely on workplace issues, it is our job to help employers develop proactive strategies, strong policies, and business-oriented solutions to cultivate an engaged, stable, and inclusive workforce. Our podcast identifies issues that influence and impact the workplace and its continuing evolution, and helps answer the question on every employer's mind: how will my business be impacted? Biden-era guidance on responsible AI use has recently been removed from public-facing websites of certain federal agencies, including the EEOC, OFCCP, and DOL. However, that does not mean companies are absolved from legal responsibilities when utilizing AI in support of business operations. On this episode of We Get AI for Work, we discuss the developing trend of deregulation of AI at the federal level and what laws employers can expect to be enforced on the state and local levels. Today's hosts are Eric Felsberg, principal in Jackson Lewis's Long Island office, and Joe Lazzarotti, principal in the firm's Tampa office and co-leaders of the firm's AI group. Eric and Joe, the question on everyone's mind today is, how can organizations adopt and innovate AI technology and remain compliant with relevant laws and regulations? And how does that impact my business?
Thank you, Alicia, and hello, everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of We Get AI at Work. My name is Eric Felsberg, and I'm here, as always, with my colleague and friend, Joe Lazzarotti. So, Joe, we have what we think is a very interesting episode today as we discuss AI and government enforcement. I think we can all agree that a lot has happened over the last, say, month or so as our nation has transitioned to a new presidential administration under President Donald Trump. And the new administration's policies have impacted certainly many parts of our lives, but especially including our favorite topic, which is artificial intelligence.
Yeah, Eric, I think, good to be with you, as always. I think that's right. I mean, there's certainly been, to say that there's been a distinct change in direction is probably an understatement. Since January, the inauguration, has been quite a few executive orders, et cetera. And AI is no different. I think, as we saw, there's been quite a bit of thinking around AI. How do we regulate it? Do we regulate it? I remember I was talking maybe at some point about a meeting in New York that Senator Schumer was leading with some others, and there was a big question. Well, should we even regulate it at all? And then ultimately, the Biden administration started to begin to build a framework, a blueprint. I think was one of the documents that was put out by the White House at that time, trying to think about ways to put in place some guardrails around development. And then, of course, Trump administration came in and is taking a bit of a different approach, hoping, I think, to provide an atmosphere and environment for greater innovation. And in the process, beginning to kind of maybe pull back, but we're not really sure where the administration is headed. But it certainly looks like it's in looking for more innovation in AI.
Yeah, I think that's true, Joe. I think one of the things that we've seen from the Trump administration as compared to the prior Biden administration, Biden, as you mentioned, his administration very interested in establishing guardrails, right? Kind of putting a lot of attention where AI could go wrong. And we spent a lot of I'd say the last year or so kind of immersing ourselves in some of the guidance we saw from that administration and, tried to think about how to react to it. And the Trump administration, right, has really kind of moved on to this, they use the phrase global AI dominance, right, which is let's make the United States front and center on this issue of AI. And so for starters, what President Trump has done is he has kind of overseen the rescission or the backing off of executive orders that came out under the Biden administration, a pullback of some of the guidance that we came to know on some of these websites. So, for example, there was Executive Order 14110, and this was a former executive order aimed at safe, secure, and trustworthy development of the use of artificial intelligence. That was rescinded on Inauguration Day, right? So this was an executive order that our former president Biden had put into place. And as you can kind of tell from the name, the emphasis was, hey, let's move forward with this AI stuff, but let's be careful, right? Let's make sure that we're doing it in a safe, secure way, and that we can kind of trust the development of some of these technologies. Trump did away with that almost immediately, right upon entering office. And if you haven't, to our listeners, taken a tour recently of EEOC's website, OFCCP, and other aspects of the Department of Labor website, I think you'll be in for somewhat of a surprise, because a lot of the content, insofar as AI was concerned, has been removed. There was a technical assistance document that was formerly on the EEOC's website that was aimed at assessing adverse impact in software algorithms and AI, in connection with their use in employee selection procedures, under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Can't find that anymore, right? That seems to be removed from the EEOC's website. Additionally, there was a fact sheet that was dedicated to the use of wearables. And I know, Joe, you and I talk about this often. But anyway, there was this fact sheet that kind of talked about the issue of wearables, and under the kind of umbrella of federal employment discrimination laws. That too has been removed. And there was another document, right, focusing on the Americans with Disabilities Act, and the interplay between that act and artificial intelligence. Can't find that. And then, and when if that's not enough, EEOC had a artificial intelligence and algorithmic fairness initiative, and that is off the website as well. So not only has there been kind of a marked change in focus by this new administration, but they seem to be kind of just erasing, if you will, a lot of these guidance documents from some of the public-facing websites.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, definitely, I know we wrote on the EEOC guidance on Title VII, and then there was also one, as you mentioned, on ADA. And I know you've been dealing a bunch with the OFCCP issues regarding artificial intelligence and equal employment opportunities for federal contractors, right? And, what's interesting, though, is at least the, just as an example, looking at the EEOC documents on ADA and Title VII, right? The agency, even at that time, said, look, this is not binding regulation. It's just kind of guidance and maybe kind of a statement about how the law might, apply and what are some best practices. And that's kind of what I came away from that document, was that it's kind of beginning to indicate what this agency's position was, and some things that you can do in advance. And maybe as we'll, as we've been talking about, I don't know that those are necessarily things that you should still ignore. And I think as we'll get to, it's like, while the agency may be going in a different direction, at least during this administration, there's still a body of law out there that, certainly at the federal level and at the state level, that companies are still going to have to grapple with. And, that may not be going away. We'll just, I think time is going to tell in terms of what we see in terms of regulation at the federal level anyway. But certainly, the Trump administration is going full steam ahead with looking to really kind of tout innovation. I think that announcement that came out recently about an investment, I think like $500 billion that was announced with Apple, after meeting with the company, that seems to very clearly align with the president's objectives with AI. I think Vice President spoke at a summit in Paris, again along the same lines, looking to make the U.S. kind of the gold standard. Especially after some of the the platform that China announced. I mean, there's all this going on with AI and who's going to have dominance in the world on a technology that is really ubiquitous and has gotten so influential. So you can see both sides of it, I suppose. The side of wanting to not have regulation constrain innovation and development, and to be the leader in this technology that's so influential, and at the same time trying to say, well, okay, Yes, but how do we also protect civil rights? How do we also protect privacy and data security? How do we also help people make decisions in a way that aren't going to hurt people in a bad way? So, again, we'll have to see how that battle continues over the next months and years.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Because I think to the kind of untrained eye here, right, people may be left with the impression that, hey, look, the Trump administration seems to be pulling back on, these documents that we talked about earlier, and maybe the perception is, hey, then there's really very little risk here for us, right, in terms of kind of an AI use perspective. But if you think about, and your comments touched on this, Joe, if you think about kind of what the Biden administration was doing, they weren't, I wouldn't say necessarily coming up with new laws, right, necessarily aimed at AI. They were just kind of saying, look, there's this new technology, it's exciting, it's AI, but hey, don't forget, right, there are laws that apply here. And we're going to offer you some best practices, some guidance as to kind of how you can, stay clear of some of those laws and still try to use AI, right? So we talked about how Trump's moving away from that, but even though all these guidances are coming down, AI could still be used in a manner that is violative of things like Title VII, the ADA, right, or the ADEA, right, Age Discrimination and Employment Act. And so a viable claim, right, that's premised on discrimination that's, again, violative of those laws may still be premised on how an AI platform is being used. And, one thing we've seen through a lot of the Trump executive orders, they may not be giving a lot of guidance and so forth. But what's clear, I think, from the Trump administration is you better not violate federal law. And if you violate federal law, that's where this administration will pay attention. So I still think, right, if AI is being used in a way that obviously, if it's being used in a way to disparately treat people, that certainly it could be a violation, and you would expect some sort of enforcement, right? But also from a disparate impact perspective. Now, I know, Joe, you and I talked about there's been some kind of rumblings out there about, is the whole notion of disparate impact, right? This idea that, you didn't mean or intend to discriminate. You had a facially neutral policy, but the effect of that particular policy is, is excluding people, right, from the employment process, for example, at disproportionately greater rates. Let's say women versus men, than their counter demographic. And there's been some kind of rumblings out there about whether that theory of discrimination will go away at some point. But for the time being, it's still here, right? And so some of these AI tools, the way that they're used, could yield disparate impact that may be a violation of laws like Title VII and others. But truth be told, we didn't really see a lot of enforcement or that much concern on the federal level. Where a lot of concern was raised over the last couple of years is on the state and local level, right? Where I sit outside New York City, we have the New York City automated employment decision tool law, right, which is really focused on the issue of bias in the use of AI tools in the city. We have Colorado's law aimed at high-risk AI systems, and we have others in Illinois, California that also present compliance obstacles for those kind of that are involved in the AI space. And some of these laws, right, are aimed at the developers as well as the end users of the technologies. And so, I say all this to say that, especially to our listeners, don't be kind of lulled into kind of a false sense of security where to say, look, the enforcement around this is going to be lax. You are subject to these existing state and local laws. We absolutely expect more to come. And just because there's not a lot of guidance on these websites, federal law still can be violated vis-a-vis use of an AI tool. So, so Joe, with all that in mind, right, what would you say an employer should be thinking about now in the current environment?
Well, just to kind of key off what you were saying too, Eric, to take a page out of privacy law in the U.S., I think for the last at least 20 or so years, the United States hasn't adopted a national federal privacy law like you see in other countries. And yet the states moved in and we see, 19 or 20 states with comprehensive privacy laws. We've been trying to pass a federal data breach notification requirement that's generally applicable. That hasn't happened. And every state in the country now has a data breach notification law. So I think that when you think about this, certainly I agree. There's a level of federal law that certainly presents risks for companies, but there's also a growing body of state law. As you mentioned, in New York and Illinois, there's a significant set of regulations coming out, likely soon in California, both with respect to the California Civil Rights Council, which just proposed its second round of modifications on rules that get at these same issues we're talking about in terms of, civil rights, discrimination, and so on. One issue out of that second round is, increases in record keeping that employers who engage in who use these types of decision tools have to really think about. So there's really not necessarily a loss of regulation and law on how, these technologies will be applied. And I think the other thing to remember is that we're talking about just whether another layer of regulation, AI law, if you will, is going to be applied. And the reality is there's a whole bunch of existing laws, whether it's treating people, discriminating against people, how we are collecting or handling their data, how do we go about making decisions? Those things still have to happen. AI is just a tool that facilitates that in a way that may require additional regulation. So I think to your question, I think certainly employers will have to continue to watch these developments carefully, certainly in their state, and how they're using them and where they're using them, so they understand the jurisdictional issues about whether they're in a certain state or not. That's going to be important, and we see that with some of the privacy regulation. I think with any technology, whether it's AI based or not, what I see is a lot of organizations struggle with is, how do we understand what this tool is actually doing and what risks does it present, not just from a legal perspective, but from a practical perspective, an administrative perspective, and a business perspective. Do your clients want you to be using that technology, right? So I think the things that we talked about over the last several episodes and things that we write and just talking with each other, it's like governance is still important, and having policies around, collecting and using significant amounts of data, that's all still important. Regardless of where the Trump administration heads, I think companies still have to think about those things.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think now more than ever, you have to monitor kind of how AI is being used in the workplace. And, you talked about governance, and a big part of that is if you, for our listeners, if you don't already, you really should think very strongly about having a policy in place. Don't just put a kind of a one size fits all type policy, but think about, kind of how it's being used in your workplace. What are you trying to control for? And, that I think is going to be really critical in the current environment, because it's only going to become more onerous as we move forward. But certainly a lot to think about. But Joe, as always, great discussion. For our listeners, we hope you found the discussion helpful. And as always, if you have any questions or would like us to cover a specific AI related topic, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at ai@jacksonlewis.com. And with that, thanks again for listening, and we'll be back soon.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us on We Get Work. Please tune in to our next program, where we will continue to tell you not only what's legal, but what is effective. We Get Work is available to stream and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Libsyn, SoundCloud, Spotify, and YouTube. For more information on today's topic, our presenters, and other Jackson Lewis resources, visit jacksonlewis.com. As a reminder, this material is provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended to constitute legal advice, nor does it create a client-lawyer relationship between Jackson Lewis and any recipient.